Hey, what's up guys? Tactical Pickle here, and today we're going to be setting up our very own emulation station using the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B. So this is the newest version of the Raspberry Pi. It's got a 1.2 gigahertz processor and I believe 1 gig of RAM. Now, excuse me, I've looked at other of these hobbyist boards out there, and from what a lot of the research that I've come across, and if you're fairly new to all this, you'll want to stick with the Raspberry Pi. There is other boards out there that might be cheaper. There might be boards out there with better specs. But all in all, Raspberry Pi, I believe, has the largest community support around it. So if you're new to all this hobbyist hardware like the Raspberry Pi, I'd recommend sticking with the Raspberry Pis because there's a lot of information out there on how to do the different stuff, and I'm really new to it myself, so it was a bit of a learning experience, but it wasn't as difficult as I expected it to be to actually do this whole process. So that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you how to set that up. So first and foremost, what the emulation station is, and the reason why I wanted to do a project on it, is with the release of the Super Nintendo, I guess the new SNES Classic that they're bringing out, or it might have already been released, where they're bringing a bunch of the old classic Super Nintendo games back to a small compact Super Nintendo that I believe sells for $60 or $80, I forget. However, with the as popular as the NES Classic was, the Super Nintendo one's probably going to be just as hard to find, and you're going to get people that are buying it to purposely resell it for that value, for increased value. So with this, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to set up the same exact system and more, excuse me. So the software that I am planning on installing on this will actually include multiple emulators, which is software that basically mimics a game console inside the computer. And this is going to have all the popular ones from Game Boy, Super Nintendo, the regular original Nintendo. I believe it has some Ataris, has the Dreamcast on there, has the N64, PlayStation. Though from what I've been reading, that the later end consoles like the the N64, the PlayStation, the Xbox, if they have it on there, a lot of those have some compatibility issues with running on something like this, so there might be issues with performance and how they actually play. So what you're going to need, obviously, starting off, is the Raspberry Pi 3 Model B. So this is the newest version. Now you can do it on the other Raspberry Pi boards, but this is the newest one, has the best performance, so that's why I went with it. This you can get for, I believe, about $35 on Amazon. So you'll need that. And what you're going to also need is a power cord. So this is for the Raspberry Pi 3. You can search for it and find a whole bunch of them. What you want to make sure it has is 5 volts and 2.5 amps, and a micro SD, or excuse me, a micro USB end on it. So if you just search Raspberry Pi 3 Model B power cables, it should pop up with a bunch. Now there are kits out there that will include most of what I'm showing you today, but I bought all this separate as I was learning. So next up is you're going to need a memory card. I went with so you'll need a micro SD card. I went with a 32 gig micro SD card because that's more than enough space for most anything that you're ever going to do on here. And I believe it was only about $13 on Amazon, so you pick up one of those. And you're also going to want to pick up something like this if your computer doesn't have a way to read micro SD cards or even the regular SD card, because it comes with the adapter. So I picked this up. It was $5.50. What it is it plugs in through USB, and it has the ability to read either a micro SD card or the full size micro or a full size SD card right here. It does also on this end have a a micro USB, so you can actually plug it into a phone if you wanted to. But for our purposes, this is just going to be for because my computer actually does not have a slot for a micro SD card. So some computers out there do actually have that for the SD card slot to read. So I picked that up just to be safe, and also on mine. You'll want a separate USB thumb drive. This one here is just one I had laying around. It's about 4 gigs of storage, which is more than enough. Now this is what you're actually going to put your games on when you load it onto the Raspberry Pi. And then I picked up some heat sinks. This was only a couple bucks. This actually comes with quite a few heat sinks, as well as a copper transfer plate for putting it on the CPU of the Raspberry Pi to help cool it down. And then as well, you're going to need a case. I 3D printed this, however, I'm going to have to look for a different one. I don't know how well that's going to show up. It's kind of washed out given that it's white. But I printed up the Super Nintendo. Somebody went out there and designed a Super Nintendo style case that fits the Raspberry Pi, which is really cool. However, when I was actually looking at it and I took out my Pi to just kind of do a test fit, I noticed that on the inside the fastener mounting holes actually didn't line up with what was on my Raspberry Pi. Now it's possible that they might have switched manufacturers of the PCB board that the whole Pi is actually designed for, so it might be a little bit larger, might be a little bit smaller, depending on, you know, the manufacturer. So I'm gonna have to look around at other cases, but you can buy them. You don't need one like this. You can buy just a generic one out there. So next up, you're gonna need a HDMI cable. So the output for the Raspberry Pi, majority of people use the HDMI on it. So you're going to want to have an HDMI cable as well as going out to a screen that can output, and I believe 1080p or 1080i. At least have a, they recommend that 1080, I believe 1080i or 1080p as what they recommend the output be. But I believe you can do it on 720p and all those as long as it has a HDMI input. So you need that, and then also you're going to need a mouse and keyboard so that you can actually navigate through the system. Now what's really cool, and I don't actually have it with me, but I'll show it later, is with this software that we're going to be installing, it has a lot of native support for various controllers. So the controller that I'm going to be using is actually my wired Xbox One controller, which is currently connected to my Xbox One, but it's not the standard Xbox controller. It's actually a third-party Afterglow controller, and it was actually able to read it, which you'll see later on when we boot up the software. Now there's also going to be a couple software tools that you'll need as well to actually prepare the different memory cards and USB cards. So we'll get into that now when we switch over to my computer and I show you through the software on what we're going to do. Alright, so now we're on to the software side of things. So I'm going to link it down below in the description, but what you're going to want to do is download the newest pre-made image of RetroPie for Raspberry Pi. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and link it down in the description below. Right here you got your 2 buttons to download the actual Raspberry Pi file, whether you have the Raspberry Pi 0 or 1, or over here the Raspberry Pi 2 or 3 model. Since we have the Raspberry Pi 3 model, we're going to want to download this file here. Now I went ahead and already downloaded it, so we're going to go ahead and skip that part. And then the second file program that you're going to need is a program called Etcher. And I'll link this down below. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow you to burn your Raspberry Pi image, or excuse me, the RetroPie image to your micro SD card. So this is so far the best way that I've found to do it. So let's go ahead, downloads here. So we got Etcher. I tried Win32 Disk Imager. It didn't work out for me. So I went ahead and I already installed them. So here's our RetroPie image right here already downloaded. So next thing we're going to do is you're going to want to go to your PC. And right now I have my USB card, or excuse me, my micro SD card installed. And what you want to do, if yours isn't empty, you're going to want to format it to FAT32 right here. So you just right click on the USB drive, come down to format, FAT32. I do a quick format and start. What it'll do is it'll erase everything on the USB drive and format it to the FAT32 style of whatever it is. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there halfway through it. Okay, so now that we have our memory card in the computer, let's go ahead and open up Etcher. And so there we go. Now we got Etcher open, and it already selected our micro SD card right here. So generic mass storage USB device, set up for 32 or 31.91 gigabytes. So select image. Here we go. RetroPie. Now, during some of the installation processes, it actually tells you to unzip this file, because as you can see, it's a .img.gz, so it's a zip file. However, the nice thing with Etcher is you can actually, let's go ahead and select it. You can select a zip file, and it will automatically convert it, well, unzip it, and then flash it to your SD card. So as you can see, we have our RetroPie image here. It has our USB device right here, and then we go ahead and hit flash. So you might get prompted with this depending on your Windows settings. So we'll hit yes, and you'll see right here it's starting, and it should give you a percentage as it goes through. And see, we're at 2%. So it'll give you kind of an estimated time of how long it's going to take. I'm not going to sit here and record it through the whole process, because what it's going to do is it's going to write this image to your SD card, and then it'll actually verify the file. So it'll take a little bit of time. Alright, so it looks like Etcher finally completed. So it'll say flash complete, and you can actually flash another. So let's go ahead and hop back over to our computer here, and we're going to refresh. So it looks like removable disk is what it actually formatted it to. So alright, let's pop over. It actually popped up during the installation, or during the actual flash process. It'll actually pop up the folder for you to view. So let's go ahead and pop over to installing it on the Raspberry Pi. Alright guys, so here we are about to go through the boot process of actually booting into RetroPie. So you got your memory card, and on the back side of your Raspberry Pi right here is where you're actually going to install the memory card. Now you're also going to need a controller of some sort. Now here's my Xbox One controller. Now as you can see, this isn't the standard. This is the Afterglow LED controller. So right here, it's corded. You're going to need corded unless you have the Bluetooth module for the Raspberry Pi set up. But for now, we're just using the corded Xbox controller because it has the built-in support. You have your HDMI cord hooked up to your display. So I'm going to go ahead and hook up my HDMI prior to applying power. And then we're going to go ahead and apply power here. And once that happens, you should see on the screen, it'll start going through the loading process for booting into the actual OS. So over here on the left-hand side, I don't know how clear it's going to be. I couldn't get the camera to actually focus very well on the display. But you'll start seeing a bunch of text over on the left-hand side as it loads through all the different information required for booting in. So here we are, you'll see RetroPie, it'll pop up, and then it'll actually go back to like the previous screen where it showed all the text. Over on the left-hand side is it, I believe, distributes the different directories and whatnot as it sets it up for the actual boot process. So, okay, here we are back into that. And eventually it'll pop up with the Emulation Station, which is what the RetroPie is built on top of, the operating system. So, all right. So there we are, Emulation Station. Now it says welcome. So this is, we successfully booted into our RetroPie, software. So now, as you can see, no gamepad is detected. So I'm just going to go ahead and install this into a USB port. The controller powers up, and then we're going to go ahead and hold A. As you can see, it said the Afterglow controller was detected. And then on this here, you're just configuring the gamepad. So D-pad up, down, left, right, start, select, A, B, X, Y, left shoulder, left trigger, right trigger, left thumbstick in, right thumbstick in, left analog up, down, left, right analog up, down, left, right, and then I'm going to use this as my hotkey right here. So I press that, and then you go ahead and press A to be okay. All right, so now we're in the actual home screen for the RetroPie. Here you can see the configuration. So you can, adjust different settings within RetroPie. Here, Bluetooth if you got the module. And you can also set up Wi-Fi because the RetroPie 3 actually has the built-in Wi-Fi on it. So let's go ahead and prepare our USB drive to boot in some games. All right, so now that we're back over at our computer, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put your flash drive into the computer. As you can see, right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to format it just like the other one. FAT32, start. What it'll do is it'll erase everything on there and format it to the proper file system. So once you have your empty USB drive in there, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go inside there, and you're going to want to create a new folder, and just name it RetroPie. All right, so now that you have that, all you have to do is go back. You're going to want to eject your flash drive just so you don't run into any problems, and then you're going to go back over to your your Raspberry Pi. Now what you want to do is you want to make sure that your Raspberry Pi is still on. All right, so now that you have your USB prepared, all you have to do is just insert it into the Raspberry Pi here, and it should light up. Now on the online official instructions it says wait for it to stop flashing, and then it should be good. However, mine continually flashed. Some USB drives won't actually flash because they don't have the built-in LED. So wait about a minute or two. The process shouldn't take too long because all it is just setting up a file directory within your USB drive. So once that's done, you just go ahead and remove it. And then we'll swap back over to the computer and get some games on here. All right, so now that we're back at our computer, we can see right here that our USB drive is registered. Now you might get an issue when you pop it into the computer. It might say that there was a issue with the drive that it needs to scan and fix it. You can continue without scanning. It should be fine. So you go into here and see our RetroPie folder. And these 3 new folders that were added when you plugged it into your Pi. So the ROM folder is where you're going to actually install all of your ROMs, which are the games in their software format. So as you can see, these are all the different emulators that are located on the Raspberry Pi. You know, you see you have the Atari 2600, 7800. You know, you got the Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, N64, the original Nintendo Entertainment System. There's the PlayStation emulator. You got the Sega, Super Nintendo. So any one of those are, you just want to load the game into that specific folder. So let's go ahead, and I downloaded a couple already, so let's go ahead and extract them. Let's see, we'll just extract it to here. So this is Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. Now this is a Super Nintendo ROM. So we'll copy that, and what you're going to do, go back to your ROMs folder, and we'll go to the Super Nintendo ROM folder, and then you're just going to paste it. And then right here, it should copy it. Should be fairly quick because they're not a large file. So, which is weird it's taking as long as it is, but let's go ahead and go back to our downloads. And then Battletoads, I'm going to go ahead and extract it. So this is actually just the original NES game. And we'll go back to here. Go back, and then you're going to find the NES folder. And then you're going to paste it into here. And once again, for some reason, it's taking longer than it should, which I do believe it has to do with the actual USB drive that I chose for this. So now that we have a few ROMs installed, you're going to want to go back to your, well, you can just click your PC here, and you're going to want to eject the USB drive. Alright, so now that we have a couple games actually installed on here, let's go ahead and put it back into the Raspberry Pi. And all you have to do to get it to load up the games, you're going to press your start button. You're going to come down here to quit, and you're going to go restart Emulation Station. Now you'll have to do this every time that you load new games onto your thumb drive so that it actually can refresh what games are available to you. So as you can see here, we have a game available for the Nintendo Entertainment System as well as the Super Nintendo System. Now, as soon as you add a game on here, it'll actually populate up the available ROM, or excuse me, the available emulator. So as you can see, we have access now to the Super Nintendo emulator as well as the original Nintendo emulator. And it's as simple as pressing A, select the emulator. So here we have Legend of Zelda. You just press A, and we now boot into the game. Now in this part, it's loading up the game. You can press A and actually access a couple features. I believe you can adjust the resolution if some of the games aren't running properly. You can reduce the resolution so it doesn't scale it as much and require as much hardware. So as you can see, we booted into Zelda. We're just going to go ahead and set it up just to test it, make sure we work okay. Alright. Okay, seems to be working great. It actually, the quality actually looks really good. It's scaled really well. Some games might not. It all depends on the game itself. So, can't seem to skip through this very fast. But seems to be working flawlessly, which is nice. That's what we wanted. Yep, works great. Sound works great. All the buttons seem to be working responsive, no lag. Awesome. So that's pretty much it. Now, if you're wondering how to get back to the actual Raspberry Pi menu system, you know, your hotkey here doesn't work. None of the buttons will actually be part of the game. So to get back to the actual file menu system or the Raspberry Pi our RetroPie main login screen, you're going to hold your hotkey button as well as press the start button. So that'll bring you back to the actual main stage here. So that's pretty much it. Now it comes down to what you're going to want to do eventually is you're going to want to install your heat sinks on your Raspberry Pi. Now there's two sizes on here. So the larger size heat sink that's in here is going to actually go on the CPU right here. And then they have smaller size ones if you get this specific kit, which will actually go on the GPU, which is the graphics processing unit down here. And so they include the metal heat sinks here. There's actually a few of them. There looks to be possibly about 5 of each, as well as the aluminum heat spreaders down in there to help with the transfer. Alright guys, so that completes our Raspberry Pi Emulation Station tutorial on how to set that up to kind of create your own. Basically it's gonna be the Super Nintendo Classic, the Nintendo Classic, you know, you got a bunch of other different emulators on there, so all you got to do is just add your ROMs on there and you're good to go. So I just have my Raspberry Pi just temp installed inside this case here while I look for a better solution for this. But depending on your case, all you need is you know, you carry around your HDMI cable, your power cable, and your controller, maybe 1 or 2 depending on the game. You should be able to set up multiple controllers and actually have multiplayer on these, and you're good to go. I mean, that's pretty cool. All you got to do is just go somewhere and where you have power and access to a monitor or something, and you can plug it in and play. And you know, as you can see, it's not very large. It should fit easily inside a different carrying case and different styles of carrying cases and whatnot. And that's pretty cool if you're ever traveling and you're on the road inside a motel, hotel. You know, a lot of times they have HD TVs in there, and all you got to do is bust this out and run your HDMI cable to it, and you got tons of games at your fingertips. Now I do want to note in the process that we showed, that I showed for actually creating the boot disk for the RetroPie, is that it did create the actual boot partition for RetroPie. However, it didn't create a partition for the rest of your memory. So if you plug this into an actual computer, all you're going to see is, I believe, about 53 megabytes of your total storage of your memory card, which is allocated to your boot drive. Now I'm sure there's programs out there that'll actually allow you to create separate partitions so that you can utilize the rest of the space. I'll try and create a separate video on how to do that here in the coming days, just so that we can fix that problem. I do know that WinDisk, I believe it is WinDisk, Win32 Disk Imager, I believe it is, will create separate partitions for your boot drive as well as the rest of the memory. However, I just couldn't get that to work, so that's why I showed Etcher. It's a fairly easy process. You don't need to actually unzip the operating system to get it to install. However, you do run into this issue, so I just wanted to make light of it. Hopefully I'll have a video out here in the next couple days that'll show the process of how to fix that, and that way you have total access to all your memory. And I do believe you can actually transfer the games from the from the USB drive onto the SD card, so you don't have to lug that around as well and take up a USB port. Which is the nice thing about the Raspberry Pi model, is they actually have 4 USB ports. So yeah. Alright, that pretty much concludes the video. I hope you guys found it helpful. If there's some parts in the video that didn't make sense, or you have questions about the whole process, let me know down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer. Sorry about that. I'll do my best to answer it, and either with a comment, or if the part of the video wasn't clear enough, I can put out a separate video kind of going into a little more detail on how to fix that issue. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This was definitely a learning process for me. Some of you might have noticed that I'm dressed different from the start of the video, as this is taken a few days for me to actually do. I ran into an issue with my first Raspberry Pi, so I had to send it back. One of the things on my PCB board was broken, so I had to send it back. Then I ran into an issue with recording my screen. The video now, it's going to be a little bit darker, but the first time I shot it, it was actually really washed out. The settings for the webcam that I'm using, the exposure, it was super bright, so you couldn't see it, wasn't focused in on the screen, so it was basically unusable. So I had to reshoot that, as well as wait for my new Raspberry Pi. So hopefully this will come together and it'll be pretty coherent. I tried my best to make it easy as possible. I like doing these videos of these kind of tutorial videos, because a lot of these I'm new to it, so I try to do it from my perspective of being somebody that's new. I try to explain as much as possible, kind of make it as easy as possible, and all in all, this whole process was fairly easy. As long as you have basic knowledge on how to use computers and whatnot, this process shouldn't be very difficult at all. So I'll make sure to link all the files down in the description below of what I used, and hopefully you guys are able to set this up and use it on your own. So, alright guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully you found the video helpful. If you did, hit the like button. If you didn't find it helpful, or if it was just a terrible video, you know, let me know down in the comments below what I could do differently, how I can improve, you know, stuff like that, because I can't improve if I don't know that I'm doing something wrong. So like I said, hopefully you guys found it helpful. I look forward to actually getting this thing fully set up and ready to go. One cool thing about this is, if eventually down the road you don't find yourself using it very much, all you have to do is pop out the memory card, wipe it, and install something different on it. The Raspberry Pi community is huge. There's tons of different projects that you can actually use your Raspberry Pi for, and for 35 bucks for that little board, it's awesome what it's capable of doing. So as always guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next video.